Welcome to the Encore Audio Archives YouTube channel. I'm Taper Dave, and this is my channel. I've uploaded hundreds of talks here that I've recorded at meetings in West LA, and I've also recorded conventions starting in 2013. I've got a bunch of those up. And Walt and Mary Murray, the original owners of Encore Audio Archives, started the company in the 80s, and Walt recorded Joe and Charlie's and a bunch of stuff down in Vista, California. My sobriety date is June 20th of 1994. I hope you find something you like, so please like and subscribe to my channel and comment down below. If you want to hear something that I don't have or that you don't see, I'll see that I get it. Anyways, take care and have a great day if you want to.
Good evening, I'm Duncan Elkinson and I am an alcoholic. It's nice to be at a home group. Michael, so glad you showed up. Why don't you lead us in the Serenity Prayer? God, give me serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Please. Family that prays together stays together, and I'm with family tonight. It's a home group for me. I want to start by thanking a kind and loving higher power that I've relied very heavily on this last week. Most of you know my loving higher power, the one I choose to call Bubba. Bubba got to be very big this week. He needed to be big this week. On no less a note, I want to thank Patty for booking me a month ago to speak tonight. Well, let me be honest about this. Patty left a message I could have any Sunday in November. And I thought, alcoholically, I'd do her a big favor. Spare her the indignity of trying to round up a speaker on a holiday weekend. I would just bite the bullet, do it for her, let her wait to Christmas to find out what miserable time it is to be a secretary of a big meeting. And I thought that right up until the beginning of this week. And then I realized that I think there was a little Bubba action going on in that, because I really need to be here tonight. And I appreciate your asking me to share. I want to welcome those newcomers. I took down your names. I hope some of you got cards and handshakes during the break. There was a Merrick and a Camille. Are they still here? Okay. And there was a Wayne and a Ray and a Matt and someone whose name I missed. Welcome. Getting sober on holidays means a lot to me. My AA birthday is January 1st, which was proof positive that God does have a sense of humor. I was a society caterer, and in the catering trade, New Year's is a non-event. There's no business for society caterers on New Year's. Any jerk with a shotgun and a six-pack is hosting a New Year's party. Biggest party in the world, New Year's, right? No standards. Six-packs, bags of chips, mystery meats. No. So it's truly God's judgment on me that I have to celebrate New Year's Day as my sobriety birthday. There was Kevin with 60 days. Where are you? Great. Welcome. Yes, I remember. Good going, guy. And Junior with 90 days. What a blessing. What a blessing. That's what I like about the Marina Center. You can get them fresh. When my sponsor got sick, he said the only thing that he really missed about having to limit his activities was he couldn't have access to newcomers anymore. He didn't get to enough meetings where he could catch newcomers anymore. He relied on us guys to bring newcomers to him. I know what he means. Anyone else I should thank? I want to thank Richard for starting off today. It was neat and unplanned, wasn't it? It was a bit of a surprise. Be the opening act. Richard qualifies for double jeopardy. He's heard me twice in the same calendar day. There ought to be a law. Just plain and simple ought to be a law. I used to apologize for people having to hear me, same time twice a month or twice a quarter or whatever. I can't do that anymore. My sponsor told me not to, particularly if it was a home group. Home groups need to hear people who call their groups home. It's an obligation of a home group. But it's also an obligation of a home group that if someone doesn't show up for a week or two, to get on the phone and call them. And that's the truth. This passes both those tests. This is truly a home group format. There are people I see in this room that I've known since I moved to the West Side 10 years ago. There are a lot of people in this room that I've known in this room, you know, and that shows a certain continuity. I really like being able to be connected to the AA chain. You know, my sponsor, my sponsor's sponsor, and my sponsor's sponsor, and his sponsor. And I know these guys, you know, and it goes all the way back to Bill and Bob, if you will. You know, there's 65 years of unbroken AA chain. And gosh, weeks like this, I like being plugged into it. Just as you were talking about Ram, who can be very, very energetic, you reach for the water bottle. And it made me think of a Ram story, because I sponsored a fella, it's coming up on 2 years in London. I sponsored a fella as a newcomer, came to this meeting, had the water bottle commitment. Sundays were totally devoted to the water bottle commitment. He got the water. I know, because once he had to be out of town on business, he brought over the water with directions. The water was in the freezer for a certain number of hours. Then by 6 o'clock you needed to take the water out of the freezer, otherwise it would be solid, it would not be good for the speaker, you know. But I didn't need to remember, because at 6 o'clock he called to see if I had taken it out of the freezer. And that it was in the refrigerator, but not on the counter, you know. And then I needed to leave for the meeting no later than 7:10. I lived 2 blocks away back then. That poor fella made the mistake of telling Ram he was having a hard time getting started on his 4th step. And if you think you had a hard time getting Ram off the phone, this poor guy did it in person. Well, all of a sudden there were pencils, there were papers, there were big books, there were chases up and down the hall. This guy started his 4th step, or there'd have been no life thereafter. For some reason, Mike, I'm used to it. Mike's part of that gang, that team that we call it a tribe that Richard spoke about earlier on in his talk. And I think they should get some sort of group rate with these cell gadgets. You know, does MCI have a network for recovery? Sort of a group discount if you just punch each other in. Who was it, by the way? Yes. So let me get into it right away. While we're still all happy, I lost 2 friends this week. One of a sobriety brother who'd been a member of our tribe for several years. A handsome young fellow, only a year younger than me, battled cancer for 6 months and died Tuesday night. Thursday, his wife came with me to carve turkeys at 26th and Broadway. She's a vegetarian, so she handled all the pies and cakes for the first couple of hours. But then when that action got slow, she got on what we call scavenger detail and picked turkey carcasses for the next hour. Her husband hadn't been dead 36 hours. I do not know if I had that type of grace or presence of mind. But she was there. What an excellent example. Yesterday morning, my sponsor died. Many of you remember George Otis. He's spoken here many times. Had been just the world's best pal to me for almost 10 years. He picked me up at a big meeting I was speaking at when I was only 5 or 6 years sober and well on my way to AA guruism. You know, the next president of the Circuit Speakers Club. to hear it from me. And I made the mistake while sharing of mentioning that I truly, I think I really did, but that I truly wanted to be just vin ordinaire, meaning just another garden variety alcoholic, except that I was a wino, and for winos, the drink is vin ordinaire, just table wine. So, a couple of weeks later, I got a phone call. A friend had given him a number, and the message was, if vin ordinaire is there, maybe he'd like to go to a meeting. And he's been my sponsor ever since. It's a little numbing to think that the person who heard every one of your dirty little secrets and laughed at them, who made it all right, is gone. He suffered a long time with leukemia and lymphoma, and in the end, his passing was quite peaceful, and I'm happy that they're both in better places. But I'm a little selfish that I missed two really wonderful examples of this program. There's a bit of a miracle going on, is that I got to be there for them. Now, if any of you knew me before, there used to be people who knew me when I was in San Francisco. There are none here tonight, but if any of you knew me before, I was never anyone that someone would consider strong. People didn't call on me for important or sensitive information. I was the nebulous party planner who'd made a ton of money catering parties. I was someone you called when you needed to know what the right champagne would be. I wasn't anyone you called with anything important. And I was just as happy not to have that responsibility. The miracle of all this has been that I got to be there with them. Sober. They were sober. I was sober. And we went through it together. And there is nothing in my background that would predict that happening. I started life as a normal kid. I'm the middle of 3 neurotic children. I have a perfectly normal older sister who introduces me as her older brother. She had 2.2 perfectly normal children. She's married to the same guy 30-some years now. They're in the same house 20-some years now. She kept a car 27 years. She's a very consistent sort of person. We also have a younger brother, a much younger brother, who hasn't been sober since he was 15 or 16. My younger brother's in his 40s, if it's counting. And I'm the one who popped in the middle. I always knew I was different. Inventory revealed to me, the type of thing that can only come out when you're working with a kind and loving sponsor. Inventory revealed to me that I was sicker than my secrets. I had come from a family of secrets. It was a secret there was alcoholism in the family. It was a secret that there was mental illness in the family. There was a secret my father was a diabetic. Everything was a secret. You had to keep track who knew which secret and who didn't. And you got plugged into that pretty quickly as a kid. I was years into sobriety before I realized how sick secrets actually are. These days, being vin ordinaire means being transparent. I want to lead a transparent life. If I'm doing it, if it's important enough for me to do, I don't care who knows. I'm fortunate enough to work in a profession where it doesn't matter whether I'm an alcoholic or not. So everyone I work with knows, and I could care less what they think about it. I'm blessed that these days, if I'm doing it, and you're willing to ask me about it, I'm more than willing to tell you yes, no, or mind your own damn business. Because secrets kill. And I saw it. I saw it almost kill me. A few weeks ago, I interviewed a famous author who's a famous AA circuit speaker, who has a movie. One of his books is a movie now, and the woman who's the star is probably going to get an Academy Award. And I'm interviewing him on this little TV show I do. And I said, what does this mean? And he said, this book is all about the American dream. And my feeling, says the author, is that pursuing the American dream will hurt you. Attaining the American dream will kill you. Then I said, what is the alternative? Selfless service. There is only one alternative, and that is truly selfless service. Here's a guy who writes great books. All right, could write about anything. But every one of his books, starting from 1968, has the same underlying theme. If you're not coming from a place of selfless service, you're killing yourself. What a hard lesson for someone like me who spent the whole first half of his life being taught that that's what we were supposed to do in life, is pursue the American dream with great diligence. That the acquisition of money, the attainment of prestige and standing was what you want. All that needs to be secondary. I pursued the American dream vigorously. I went to college in upstate New York. I went to a girls' school, and then, which was an existential experience, in the 60s. And then I moved to San Francisco to go to graduate school. It was the 70s. I was a lot younger. I had a lot of hair. It was red. It was curly. I was younger. I was in my prime. And I discovered an excellent palate for wine. I had one of those in a million palates that could, catalog wines one right after another, blindfolded or not. I had all the proper adjectives down. I dined out on my tongue. Spicy, peppery, tawny, amusing, naive. Ever had a naive wine? They kick you just the same, but they're naive. Yeah. I shared this morning that one of my biggest amends was to a sommelier, the guy who takes the cork out of the bottle for you, the guy who chews the wine for you. I was at a fancy restaurant in New York. I accused him of baby rape in front of 200 diners. Baby rape. He had corked a bottle of my favorite Merlot, Chateau Margaux. Not a bad label. I figured at least 2 years early. Now, there's a chance I might have been wrong. Because I'd already had a toddy on the way to that party. In fact, there's a big chance I was very wrong. But he had to be polite about it. My graduate work was in rhetoric and public address, which was a really marketable skill in the mid-70s. So I became a caterer.
Sorry to interrupt your viewing. Taper Dave here. Just wanted to take a second to ask you to like and subscribe to my channel. Let me know if you like what you're listening. I've got some very good talks here, and this one's a great one. Just curious, do you think this is better than Zoom? Tell me what you think.
Which at the time was a good career choice for a budding alcoholic. It was also financially quite remunerative. And by the time I was 30, I was on the educational board of the San Francisco Opera. Now, I don't know if that's a big deal anymore, anywhere. But I got to tell you, at the time, San Francisco was still a very small town, controlled by a few very powerful families. I mean, it extended down to the fact that the viola player who had the first chair viola had inherited the position from her father. It was that type of town. The only other person on the board, my age, was a gal whose mother had been on the board, whose father was on the big board, and whose grandfather had shared an inheritance with his twin, which included 1/3 of the common stock of a little company known as Standard Oil of New Jersey. Can you imagine what type of bucks these people must have had? I was the nebbish caterer, Want to rent a chair, lady? I knew I was different, but I learned how to drink with them. And in learning all that drinking and writing about all that wine and pairing up all those flavors with food, which was my specialty, which makes eating today a challenge, You can see how challenged I look. Now, that's 50 less Christmas cards I have to send out. But alcohol's a great teacher. To my dying day, I will insist alcohol taught me a lot of things. Probably didn't teach me anything that was worthwhile in life, but it taught me a lot of things. It taught me how to lie with the best of. Now, I'd been a collegiate debater, so I had training. I had background in this. All right. But alcohol polished it off very well. It taught me how to cheat. I never had a client I didn't cheat. I never had a partner I didn't cheat. People paid me to serve hors d'oeuvres I didn't even make. You know? Oh, you missed the prawns? They were over there. People paid me for cases of champagne that never appeared. Regular. Just as a matter of doing business. You know? Sexually, alcohol taught me how to cover the waterfront. Anyone need an explanation? I knew it was a very mature group. Holiday crowds are always that way. You know? If two people can do it, I did it. A lot. I told you I was younger. 3 people can do it, I've done it. 4 people can do it, I catered it. Guy's got to make a living. And there was no indication that that joyride was ever going to stop, that the party was ever going to be over. I mean, I regularly realized that I needed to, you know, not wake up in stupors, that it was becoming embarrassing to have my housekeeper's children drive me home from the office. It was strange to wake up in pajamas that I didn't know I owned. You know, it was strange to wake up with people I didn't know I knew. It was hard to get strawberry daiquiri vomit off tatami mats in the apartment. You know. But I never did a single thing. I never made one single step toward changing that. I'd go away for a few weeks, or I'd try to knock off, you know, remember, try to manage your drugs. You know, I'll only have one joint while I'm corking the bottle of wine. You know, I only have one glass of red while I'm cutting up the limes. You know, philosophically, if I pass out and there's no one in the apartment, have I really passed out? Well, it's that whole business of the tree falling in the forest. Maybe I wanted to sleep in the hall between the bedroom and the bath. You know? And I teased myself with that for a long time. Christmas of 1986, Christmas is a big time for caterers. It's like your 12th, 13th, 14th, and 15th month all rolled up in one. So between Thanksgiving and the 21st of December, 22nd sometimes, I might do 60, 70 parties. You know, I had a party rental, I had a catering service. You know, I had a guy who just drove me around from party to party. I had to change ties in the back of the car, so no one's, you know, I could say to people, no, I hadn't been there. Green ties, red ties, black ties, white ties. You can do that in San Francisco because it's sort of small. You could never do that here. Gosh, by the end of the month, I'd be wrecked. Now, in '86, a couple of interesting things happened. One, I was so drunk while playing Santa Claus at a large corporate party that I fell down. But I blamed it on the soup and recovered nicely. 2, I dropped a bottle of cocaine in front of a group of school children while dressed as Santa Claus. And told them they were my vitamins. And I don't remember feeling ashamed for doing those things. So, either the 21st or the 22nd, I went to Europe. I often went to Europe to get away from visiting relatives on the holidays because they didn't drink. It would be too long a stay. So I you know, in some reason I needed to go to Europe. I'd spend the time between Christmas and New Year's in Europe. And I always swore that I was going for my health, which probably isn't entirely true, because I smuggled drugs across international borders, rolled up and stuffed in toothpaste tubes and shampoo bottles. I got kicked out of a hotel in London. But it had happened before. And I always thought, well, I wasn't that bad. I got kicked out of the hotel in Hawaii wearing clothes. I mean, I had a friend who had been kicked out of the same hotel twice, and both times she was butt naked, so I didn't figure I had a problem, you know. And I just figured the British were a little stodgy. But even then, I had a higher power, and that higher power struck me, literally struck me sober, on New Year's Eve, 1986. My sobriety date is New Year's Day, 1987. I know this is true because when the fireworks went off in Amsterdam, I rolled out of bed thinking I was in Beirut and they were bombing again. I'd never been to Beirut, but I kept up with the news. And there was wine on the nightstand. There was something in an ashtray and something in a mirror. I didn't touch them. And I don't know why I didn't touch them. To this day, I don't know why I didn't touch them. I got back to San Francisco a week or so later, and my friend, my Eskimo, my doctor, gave me a checkup and told me I was doing better. I said, well, you know, I haven't been drinking in a couple of weeks. He said, great, what about the drugs? I didn't think anyone knew. I was still keeping the secrets. I guess I hadn't kept the secrets all that well. He suggested I go to meetings, which I did to please him, and after he died 4 months later, I continued to go to meetings because I thought that would be the good thing to do. But it wasn't because I was an alcoholic. I had a butler that we'd sent to recovery because he had a problem that I went to meetings with sometimes. It took taking all of that away, all of the stuff, the apartment, the business, the seat on the opera board, for me to get a good look at what's important in life. I left San Francisco, came to sunny Southern California, and found a higher power. I found love. Now, Richard mentioned that I had read page 53 of the Big Book this morning, where it lists the proposition God is or isn't. God either is or isn't. It's our choice. That's one of the few absolutes in the Big Book. One of the other ones, and I'm proud Richard has taken such a good stand on it, is that one that we hear every time we go to meetings. Half measures avail us what? Now, isn't that unfair? You know, I often had half a bottle of wine and got half drunk. You can dig half a ditch and have quite a bit of a hole. But if you only sort of half do this, you get nothing. God is either everything or he's nothing. Well, my first sponsor was a minister. The God of his understanding may well not be the God of my understanding. But he had a kind and loving higher power. You know, and he took me through the steps twice, biblically, both times. You know, the stuff's all there, people. But he taught me how to find that kind of loving higher power. And it comes strictly through doing service work. The more unselfishly you can do it, the better it gets. The more conscious contact with that higher power you were given. And I discovered my higher power doing that. Now, I told you a few minutes ago that I've lost two very important friends this week. Both of them had lingering illnesses. Both of them suffered terribly. I don't want to go into it. It was ugly. But in the whole time these men were sick, they never stopped doing service work. I remember telling David when he asked about how all the fellows were doing, that a couple of the fellows were having a hard time. That this had bothered them deeply, and they had not come to terms with it yet. That they still had their parents and even their grandparents. And looking at this was very difficult for him. And he said, "I'm sorry." Now, if the tables were turned, I'd have said a lot of things. "I'm sorry" would not have been anywhere on the list of things I'd have said. But he genuinely was. He called people and talked to them to let them know that it was all right for them to be nervous about him being so sick. And when the end came, he got to find out just how much he was loved. If he didn't know it by then, he got to receive as well as he had given. He got married in October 2 years back. And I was going through one of my bad hair crises. You know, the other day I was talking to his parents and I couldn't remember what bad hair crisis I was going through 2 years ago, October. I'll have to go look it up. But something was wrong that was, bigger than life. So big that on the day before David's wedding, after his rehearsal luncheon and before he went to the airport to pick up all of, the out-of-town relatives that come to these things, he stopped to see me to see that I was all right. I can't imagine any groom having that type of time. But that was so typical of him. And the same way he lived was the same way he died. He didn't want it. The only thing he said to me the whole last 4 months when things really got bad was, "I don't want to be a burden to my wife or to my parents. Please make sure that whatever happens, I'm not a burden to Eileen and my parents." That's selfless service. I talked to my sponsor's sponsor when all of these things started to get bad, and he said there are 3 lessons we can learn from this, that everyone gets to learn when there's a catastrophe, when there's something that's bigger than our understanding. And indeed, when the doctors told him there was no medical solution, I had a crisis. God either is or isn't, and I had a hard time with Bubba for a couple of months. It wasn't easy to be able to say God is and my best friend is dying. That's hard to say at the same time. God is and my sponsor is in uncontrolled pain. And what I had to come to grips with is I'm this big and Bubba's bigger than the room. And I don't get to know why everything happens. I don't get to understand everything. There was a speaker here at the Marina Center, I can't even remember who it was, years ago, who said life is a tapestry. And we're in it. And we're just little knots in the bottom of the tapestry. And we can't really see what the rest of the picture is on this tapestry because we're the knots on the inside. But outside, looking down on this tapestry, is a kind and loving higher power who sees the whole picture. The only thing I can come up with is that meetings in heaven have gotten a whole lot better in the last couple of days. And I'm just going to have to hang on to that while I can. Now, if you will, and I'll close with them, the 3 lessons we might take from these seeming tragic situations happening. The first is, all of us who surround the person in trouble get to find out how much they can give. I told you earlier, I was not a big giver. I gave to the opera. I was a famous writer. I wrote one check to them after another. All right, but I never gave. I didn't do anything with my hands. I didn't do anything with my heart. All right, but in a situation like that and in a million other situations, we get to find out how big we are and how much we can give. And everyone, the person in crisis is included, too, gets to find out how dependent they are on a higher power. We all get to find out how much we need a higher power. I needed a higher power during this last week as much as my sponsor needed a higher power, as much as my friend needed a higher power. And the person in crisis gets to find out how much they're loved. If they haven't figured it out before, they get to figure it out then. They get to find out how much they're loved. And that's important for each and every one of us to know. And I found that out in AA. I found out that I don't need to define love, I just need to accept it, because in AA, the pot boils over with it. I'm so happy to share this with you all tonight. Thanks for being here.
I think we got a great talk going on here. Thanks for watching the channel. Taper Dave here. Just curious, do you think this is better than Zoom? Okay, this is how I prepare my drone for launching. I like to do it inside the cab of my truck so I'm not standing outside in the weather. To install the joysticks for control, up and down, right and left, powered on. I have an Android phone that I use to connect it to the drone with. And it's actually controlled through the iPhone, through an app. Oops, wrong way. It's actually controlled through the iPhone, or through this Android phone, through the app. It's actually controlled through the Android phone, through an app, and you connect it through this short connection right here.
Remote control connected.
Remote control's connected. So I pull out the drone. I have to extend the legs. Long legs extended first, then the short legs. Remove the gimbal protector. Set that aside, then power it on one short burst, then one long burst. I lay it down. So I have to go to calibrate. So the drone's not connected yet. It shows you here as this drone gets disconnected, even though the remote's powered on. So the drone has to establish it's connected. So I go into the app to calibration mode. First I'll calibrate the remote controller. Start calibration. Out, in, oop, out, in, up, down, and then this little wheel is to control the gimbal. So it's calibrated. Go to gimbal calibration, start calibration, and then it calibrates the gimbal. I don't know if that shows up. The gimbal's moving all over the place. Changes, you can see it on the video. And I'm calibrated to take off. It's acquired 7 satellites at the moment. There are 26 satellites up in the sky, which it has to acquire before you can take off. So it's connected. It's got enough satellites. This is white. I can go to press this little arrow button, swipe right to take off, and it would start the motors if I slid this to the right. But I'll wait till I get outside. Don't want to do it inside.